Hello, everyone. So let's start presentation about Magical C# 9. My name is Mariusz Bojkowski. I'm a passionate developer focused on C# and .NET technology. I work as a lead software engineer at EPAM. You can find my blog csharp.today and my website mariuszbojkowski.pl, and you can also reach me on social media. One important thing before we start is that every speaker really appreciate feedback. So if you want to provide feedback, please do so on questionnaires from organizers or on my website mariuszbojkowski.pl/4dev, where you can find a short form. You can rate my speak, you can provide some text feedback, and I really appreciate that. That's also the place where you can get slides from this presentation, and if you want, you can sign in for my newsletter or watch my talk about C# evolution from 1 to C# 8. But let's go to the topic. So I will talk about C# 9, when you can expect that, about changes in properties, about new concept of records, about main methods, improvements to pattern, and few other things that are going to be introduced soon. And before we start, I use some GIFs, some pictures from few pages. You can see them here. So first of all, when it's going to be available, and if it's available already. No, unfortunately, it's not available yet. But why? So because C# 9 is going to be based on .NET 5, and .NET 5 is not yet released. You can get some release candidate for experimentation, but it's not recommended to be used for production purposes. So C# 9 and .NET 5 are going to be released in November this year. So very, very soon, like 2 months or something like that. And then you can enjoy all the features. So let's now think about properties. So properties in C# were evolving for a long time. Since the beginning, they were available, but they require a lot of ceremony to set them, a lot of code that we had to write. In C# 2, they were slightly improved, and we had these different access modifiers for getters and setters. And in later versions, we've got those auto-implemented properties, which simplify usage a lot. And at some next version, we also had this property initialization. There is also a concept of object initializers in C#, and let's have a look at an example. We've got a person class with a property name, and when we create a person object, we can also set the values of a property. And that object initializers do support mutable classes only. What about immutable classes? So unfortunately, there was no support. If you wanted to have like immutable state, you couldn't use object initializers. But look, in C# 9, that's gonna be changed. And what we can do, we can have a new person created with some initializers for the name property. And later, if we try to use the name property, we cannot assign values to that. How it's achieved? So there will be a new type of setter called init, and that setter gonna be allowed to be used only when object is created, so during the initialization. The init is also regular setter, so you can put any logic you want inside. You can also use extension bodied init. And one interesting thing is that because init is only restricted for the object creation, you can also set values for read-only fields. Next thing is a new concept of records. That's something totally new for C# that you can start using. So let's have a look at this person class. You can see there is a new data keyword added, and this keyword says that it's gonna be a record. There is still a discussion if data is appropriate or if they should record keyword. That's not decided, and we're gonna know the final decision once there is an official release. But for purposes of this presentation, I will go with the data keyword as that was the original one. So what are records? Records do low value-based equality. Why is that? So records have to simulate value-based types. And if we create like two records with exactly the same properties, like in this case, we've got person 1 and person 2 exactly the same values. And if we try to compare them, they're gonna be equals gonna be true. And if we check like reference equals, that's gonna be false because those are different objects. But all the equals operators are overridden, and there is also get hash code overridden as well. But with records, we've got a lot of magic happening. So there is a new concept to modify, to change state of records. For example, if we have like a person record and we want to create a different one, person 2, we can use this with keyword. And what that's gonna do, that's gonna create a copy of a person record and will change the name property. How this is achieved underneath. So C# gonna generate a protected cloning constructor, and that constructor will copy all the properties of the original record to the new one. But that's not the only magic that is happening. So we can see other examples. So if we have a look at the record definition, that's an example. But there is a way to use more concise version. So the below one is exactly the same. And there are a few things happening here that will allow to make this description more concise. So first of all, the public modifying accessor. So in records, the default access modifier is public instead of private. That's why we can skip it in the below example. And second thing is that if we define something looking like a field, like here string name, it's gonna be transformed to init only property. And there is one more interesting thing. So records can support deconstruction. So let's have a look at this example. It's again person record with two init only properties, first name and last name. And we have this deconstruct method that supports deconstruction. And we also have some constructor accepting two fields. And there is a lot of code, and that code is probably often repeated. And again, we can have much shorter version of exactly that record. Here it is. So instead of using curly brackets, we just go with round brackets, and the syntax looks like method syntax. That's actually very concise and gives you a lot of boilerplate code underneath generated. Let's have a look at one more example. If we have a person class defined and we're gonna inherit it as a pilot class with one more additional property, and then let's say we want to create an object pilot1, and then let's create a second object pilot2 using the with keyword. And now is a question, what type of an object we're gonna get after that? So we know that the with keyword gonna use protected cloning constructor, and you can suspect that first name is a element of a person, so we probably gonna get a person object, but that's actually not the case. So if we inherit records, then the second type, like pilot in this case, gonna have also protected cloning constructor, and what we will actually get is appropriate pilot class, not only a person. One more example. Let's have a look once again, person record and an astronaut record. And if we create both of them, like person gonna have name property and astronaut's gonna have the same value in the name property. What will happen if we try to check if they are equal? Will they be equal? So if we consider like from person perspective, they have name property with the same value, so probably equal. But if we look from the astronaut class perspective, they are definitely not equal because one is astronaut and the other is just a base class person. So what should it be? How does framework handle that? And it actually doing quite well because all the equals operators are overridden, and also there is a concept of equality contract. If one record have a different contract than the other, they're not going to be equal. Now let's have a look at the main method. When you start application, you need to create a class, then a static method, and inside of that you can write your code. It's again ceremony that we need to follow, but it's not needed. So in C#9, there will be easier way to do it. We can just write code plain inside of C# file, and that's gonna be treated as a main method. There are a few limitations to that. Right now, the code have to be after using statements and before any namespace declarations, and it can be only in one file in a project. So you can also use all the main method features, like you can return exit code, you can do await if you need. You can also create local functions with all the restrictions that, local functions are only available inside of that file and you cannot use them outside. And now let's have a look at patterns. So if we wanted to check that some object is a specific type, we had to put the type name and then underscore, which is a discard. That's gonna say to compiler, we don't care about the value and we just want to check if this is of a specific type. This is again small change, but we actually can skip it right now, skip the declaration if we just want to check the type, and it's called simple type pattern. Let's have a look at different case. So here is an example how we could check if a property of a type have some specific value, like smaller than 5, smaller than 19, etc., etc. And this also can be improved with C#9. So we can check the property directly, and we can skip a lot of those cases and just use this relational pattern, which will allow us to check if value is greater, smaller, etc., than a specific value. There is also similar case. Sometimes we want to check like if it's smaller from something and greater than something. So we want to combine actually few patterns. And right now it was not possible, but in C#9 we can do that. But how? How to combine two patterns? So they actually introduce logical operations and logical patterns that you can combine few patterns together. They allow to use and or not, and especially not is very useful because now you can write really clear code, check if object is not null. So that's interesting. And finally, we've got few smaller improvements that are also quite interesting. So first of all, if we create a object, that's how we do it. Sometimes we can use more verbose version of a statement. But with C#9, we can skip, in those cases, the type name. And as you can see, compiler will be able to guess what we want to do. And that's actually the shortest version, the least amount of chars that we need to use for that. A different case, you probably don't as many times use these conditional expressions and then find out that both two types that you want to use, compiler doesn't understand them. Like in this case, we want to get result of nullable integer and compiler cannot guess that we want to do that. It just showed that null cannot be converted to integer. So what we do right now, we need to cast the integer to nullable integer, and that is sad. So with C#9, that's gonna be improved because the compiler gonna check if two types that we use have like common base class. And in this case, that's gonna be nullable integer, and it's gonna use that. It's similar with cases when we want to return astronaut or a person. An astronaut is a subclass of person. And currently, compiler will decide that the result is of type astronaut, and then gonna complain that person cannot be casted to astronaut class. But with C#9, that's gonna work. One more case, if we have like a human class, a base class with a getFood method that returns type food, and we're gonna create another class that's gonna override the method and always returns a different class. So instead of food, we return pizza because pizza is derived from food, and we could make it like more strongly typed, like you know, that's always gonna be pizza. Why we need to say that it's food? And actually with C#9, we can do that. We can say that it's gonna be one of child types from food. So just to summarize, C#9 is gonna be really a lot of improvements, a lot of changes that gonna simplify the way we work. There will be less code that we need to write, especially thanks to those record classes. There are also those small magical tweaks, as conditional expressions that gonna help us write less code, and the code's gonna be more clear, readable, understandable. Thank you for your participation, and if you have any questions, we can discuss on the chat, or you can write to me on my website. Let's go back to the studio.